Hi everyone, and welcome to session 2 or week 2 of our Ethics, Human Rights and Health course. This week we are looking at conflict, displacement and health, and we're going to be exploring that through human rights in theory and in practice. So again, this is quite a lengthy session this week in terms of written content, so take your time and work your way through it. There'll be some sections that I expect you to kind of skim through and not read too closely in great levels of depth. There are a number of definitions that are included to help get you used to the terminology. And again, it's meant to kind of be that reference session that you can go back and refer to in future weeks that you can be working on. Especially at the end of this week's session, you'll find there's a few different case studies that are included, and these are purely to help you with your essay for the end of the session or to extend that level of engagement with the topic. So don't feel pressured to go into too much of depth with those. So let's begin with a bit of a quote that we'll get to in a minute. So refugees and internally displaced peoples, or IDPs as we generally refer to them, are extremely vulnerable to human rights abuses, particularly the lack or denial of physical and mental health care. As Donko so saliently points out in this quote, refugees and displaced persons constitute a population whose origins are vitally connected to many of the most pressing issues confronting our world: the protection of human rights, the resolution of conflicts, the promotion of economic and institutional development, the conservation of the environment, and the management of international migration. But beyond these implications on geopolitics, the urgency of refugee protection issues stems from the immense human suffering that inevitably accompanies refugee flight. And you can see the reference for that below. So the human rights framework broadly, and the right to health agenda specifically, is argued to have the potential to contribute significantly to alleviating the immediate human suffering that Donko highlights, and also to the development of wider, longer-term positive outcomes for displaced persons. This session, therefore, explores the nature of forced displacement, the numbers and locations of forced migrants, as well as how displacement impacts on human rights and health status. We also examine the legal frameworks that are in place to protect displaced populations, and crucially, the way the human rights, the health as a human right approach might be utilized by and for displaced populations to highlight human rights abuses and also to improve both health rights and wider human rights. So while displacement can take place for numerous reasons, including economic necessity, disasters, and development interventions, we focus on displacement as a result of conflict specifically, although many of the issues described within this week's session also relate to other forms of displacement. Furthermore, as the majority of forced displacement is currently in developing regions, and as most displaced people move internally or to countries close to their country of origin, we focus mainly on IDPs and refugees in developing countries. However, we end with a consideration of healthcare to refugees and asylum seekers and undocumented migrants in developed countries, with a focus on Europe specifically. This links in nicely to one of the essay questions as well. Again, many of the issues discussed, such as discrimination, racism, restricted access to services, also apply to developing countries. You'll find some of the case studies, especially when we're looking at the graphs and where IDPs were situated. There's one from 2011 to kind of demonstrate what it looked like at that time. We also then bring it up to 2018 to show how the changing nature of it. But a lot of the historical case studies and more recent historical case studies are there because there's a lot of information surrounding it. So we can provide a lot of those analytical frameworks to our case studies, so we can demonstrate how you go about exploring these topics and gaining that fuller picture. So then you can apply those frameworks, the analysis, to more current case studies. I hope that helps, and I hope you enjoyed this week's session. As always, if you have any questions, any comments, please post them up on the discussion board and I'll be happy to help.